In September of 1959, the Chinese government gave the people of Shi Cheng a choice: leave everything or be submerged with it. 290,000 people were relocated inside of 12 months. They left behind houses, temples, streets, carved stone archways, and a city that had stood for more than 1,400 years. The reservoir rose, and Shi Cheng, the Lion City, went underwater. It is still there. Every archway, every staircase, every carved lion at every gate. Sitting between 26 and 40 meters below the surface of a lake, tourists now visit for the scenery. No diver noticed it for over 40 years. No official preservation plan has ever been approved, and the people who were moved, the 290,000 residents of a city that had stood for 14 centuries, were resettled with a promise the government made and largely did not keep. This is not a mystery. It is not a forgotten ruin or a lost civilization buried by time. It is a 1,400-year-old city that a government submerged deliberately in 1959. And the most extraordinary part is not that it happened. It is that it is still standing below. To understand why Shi Cheng was chosen, you have to understand what the Shinan River Dam was supposed to accomplish. By the late 1950s, the Shinan River Valley in Zhejiang province was one of the most densely settled regions in a densely settled country. The government's plan was ambitious: dam the Shinan River to create a vast hydroelectric reservoir, enough generating capacity to power the surrounding region for decades. The dam would also control flooding that had plagued the valley for centuries. The reservoir it would create was calculated to submerge a significant portion of the valley, including 2 county towns, including 27 townships, including 1,177 villages, and including the city of Shi Cheng, built during the Eastern Han Dynasty around the year 208, expanded and fortified during the Tang, Song, and Ming dynasties, and continuously inhabited for more than 1,400 years at the time of the order. As I examined the records of the relocation and the subsequent history of the site, what became clear was not the scale of the engineering achievement, which was real and significant, but the completeness of the erasure that accompanied it. Shi Cheng was not documented before it went underwater. No systematic architectural survey was conducted. No comprehensive photographic record was made. The city was simply submerged, and the reservoir was filled, and the matter was considered closed. 290,000 people left in 12 months. To put that number in context, it is roughly the population of a modern, mid-sized European city, relocated in the time it takes to complete a single academic year. Most were farmers with deep ancestral ties to land their families had worked for generations. Most had never lived anywhere else. They were given new land in government-designated settlement areas, land that was frequently less fertile, frequently further from water, frequently in regions where they had no established social networks or knowledge of local conditions. In the decades following the relocation, studies of the displaced population found persistent economic disadvantage, higher rates of poverty, and documented loss of traditional agricultural knowledge that had been specific to the Shinan River Valley's particular soil and growing conditions. The farming techniques that had sustained the valley for 14 centuries went underwater with the city. For 40 years after the reservoir was filled, Shi Cheng was largely forgotten. The reservoir became Qiandao Lake, Thousand Island Lake, named for the 1,078 islands formed by the hilltops that protruded above the waterline. It became a tourist destination. Visitors came for the scenery, for the fishing, for the boat tours between the islands. Almost none of them knew that beneath the boats, 40 meters down, a complete Ming Dynasty city was still standing. In 2001, a local government initiative proposed an underwater exploration of the reservoir as a tourism development project. Divers descended. What they found stopped them. The city was intact. Not partially intact, not ruins, intact. The cold, fresh water of the reservoir, unlike the warm, salt water of the ocean, had preserved the stone structures with extraordinary fidelity. 5 carved ceremonial archways still standing. Stone staircases leading between levels of the city, undamaged. Carved wooden beams inside some structures still holding their shape. Lions at the city gates. The same lions that had guarded the entrance in 1959 still in position. Street layouts intact enough that a resident from 1959 could have navigated them. 40 years underwater. More preserved than most surface ruins, a fraction of its age. Here is what has happened since 2001. No comprehensive archaeological survey of Shi Cheng has been completed. No systematic excavation has been planned or funded. No international body has been granted access to conduct independent study. The Chinese government has acknowledged the site's existence and cultural significance, but has not committed to a preservation or documentation program of the scale the site requires. Recreational dive tourism has been discussed. Plans have been announced and quietly shelved. The structures are now visible to anyone willing to dive to 40 meters, but the city has never been mapped in full. The artifacts within the buildings have never been catalogued. The archives that documented Shi Cheng's history before 1959 are incomplete, because no one thought to compile them before the water rose. The 290,000 people who were moved in 1959 are mostly gone now. Their children are in their 50s and 60s. Their grandchildren have grown up in cities with no memory of the Shinan River Valley. The last generation with any living connection to what Shi Cheng looked like from the inside is aging out. And the city sits undisturbed. 14 centuries of unbroken habitation. 5 carved archways still standing. Stone lions at a gate that no one had walked through since 1959. 40 meters below a tourist lake, untouched and largely unrecorded. The history of Shi Cheng itself is worth pausing on, because what was submerged in 1959 was not simply a collection of buildings, but a place with 14 centuries of continuous habitation. The city was founded during the Eastern Han Dynasty, around the year 208 of the Common Era. It was built at the confluence of 2 rivers in a valley that provided both water access and natural defensive elevation, and it grew steadily through the Tang and Song dynasties as a regional administrative center. By the time of the Ming Dynasty, the period whose architecture is most visible in what divers find today, Shi Cheng had been continuously inhabited for over 1,000 years. It had government offices, it had temples, it had schools and markets and the infrastructure of a city that had been functioning without interruption for 40 generations. The 5 carved archways that divers now photograph are Ming Dynasty structures built between the 14th and 17th centuries, but they stand in a city whose foundations go back to the 3rd century. The lions at the gates, the carved decorative panels on the stone facades, the staircases connecting the city's tiered levels. All of it is the accumulated product of a place that had been building and rebuilding itself across 14 centuries of Chinese history, through the rise and fall of 6 dynasties, through wars and floods and the ordinary passage of time. None of that was documented before it went under. There was no time. What has happened to the site since the 2001 rediscovery follows a pattern that will be familiar from other buried places in this kind of history. Initial interest, official acknowledgement, ambitious announcements, and then quietly, very little. A proposal was made to drain portions of the lake and expose sections of the city. The engineering challenges and the cost were cited as prohibitive. A proposal was made to create an underwater museum with clear viewing panels installed in the reservoir. This was discussed for years and never built. A proposal was made to conduct a complete photographic survey of the submerged structures using ROV technology. Partial surveys have been done. A complete one has not been published. Meanwhile, the water continues to do what water does. The cold temperature and the low oxygen content of the reservoir have preserved the stone and the wood far beyond what would have survived on the surface. But the lake is not static. Sediment accumulates. Aquatic vegetation grows. The wooden elements that were still holding their shape in 2001 are measurably degraded compared to later surveys. The carved details on the stone archways are slowly filling with biological growth. Shi Cheng is not frozen, it is decaying slowly, underwater in the dark. And the urgency of the documentation problem increases every year that no systematic survey is completed. Was the submersion of Shi Cheng a necessary sacrifice? The unavoidable cost of progress that brought electricity to a region that desperately needed it. A decision that any government managing a large and energy-poor population would have had to make? Or was it the erasure of 14 centuries of continuous human history, carried out in 12 months without a survey, without documentation, without a plan to recover what was being lost? An erasure made permanent not by malice, but by the simple refusal to treat a 1400-year-old city as something worth more than the land it occupied. Until someone maps what is standing in full 40 meters below Qiandao Lake, the honest answer is that we do not know what Shi Cheng still contains, and the generation that could have told us is nearly gone. If the cities that still stand below the surface, the ones we chose to cover rather than keep, are the kind of history you want more of, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.